to be self-reliant, India needs to see its industrialists investing in industry, investing in research and development, number one. And it needs to give purchasing power to its people. How can you give jobs to the youth of India if you don't industrialize? It's a key question. It's a really very important question.
It was interesting that you're saying that Gujarat is a typical case of unequal development where spending has focused on industrialization, particularly with power plants, refineries, and income inequality has only widened.
When he was elected for the second time, mega projects are given a priority. As you said, refineries, but also huge SEZ like Mundra for Gautam Adani. All these projects were very intensive in capital and not labor intensive at all. So you have growth, a lot of growth, but you don't create jobs with a coalition government. This is the irony. People think you need a strong man, you need a strong government, you need a dominant party. No, not in India. What you need is dissemination of people, consensus building, and distribution of resources. The South doesn't want to pay for the North anymore. Already in 2025. Can you imagine in 25 years from now what it will be? And if the number of MPs is multiplied by X, making the North even more hegemonic, tensions will become really acrimonious. You will have a real issue, a real challenge for federalism.
Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. With the European Commission's visit to India later this month, the EU is aiming to strengthen its trade and technological cooperation with New Delhi as it seeks to diversify economic partnerships beyond China. And also, at the same time, India has also trying to be position itself as a possible alternative to China, but its industrial challenges remain, including its high dependence on Chinese imports. To discuss all this and more, today we are being joined by Professor Christophe Jaffrelot. He's one of the most foremost political thinkers on India. He's a research director at Sciences Po and also professor of politics and sociology at King's College London. He's also written a number of books on India, the most recent one being Gujarat under Modi, Laboratory of Today's India. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
But today, Professor Jaffrelot joins us on two papers that he's authored recently to understand how India's internal politics and policies, economic challenges will shape its trajectory towards being a global power. So just for the benefit of our viewers, let us give us an overview of what these two papers really talk about. And he's here analyzed four industrial sectors: automotive, textile, electronics, and pharmaceutical. And the first report highlights two potential scenarios that could shape India's industrial future. And the second paper looks at regional disparity, particularly between the North and the South, and looks at three states, that is Bihar, Tamil Nadu, and Gujarat, and seeks to explain how variations in governance and socio-economic policies could possibly shape India's broader trajectory as a global economic power. So, Professor, first off, I want to ask you that you write that since taking office in 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has launched the Make in India initiative to stimulate industrial growth. Now, you say that a decade later, results have been mixed. You look at four different sectors, as we mentioned earlier: automobile, textile, electronics, and pharma. But the important question here is India's reliance on China. Why does it, in your opinion, raise crucial questions about the direction of India's industrial trajectory?
The whole idea of making India in 2014 was precisely to compete with China, to be a kind of industrial hub for foreigners, for foreign investors. And when you look at the outcome of this policy more than 10 years later now, you first of all see that India has not made significant progress in terms of manufacturing. On the contrary, the percentage of the manufacturing in the Indian GDP has declined from 17% in 2012, 2013 to something like 13% nowadays. So you have a decline of manufacturing when the whole idea was to increase manufacturing. And this is a real puzzle. This is a real puzzle. Why can't India develop an industry? Why can't India become an industrial power? So this is the question I ask in one of the two notes, which are part of, by the way, these two notes, by the way, are part of a larger series. We published two notes on food security and on the environmental issue last year. We'll publish one more note on the middle class this year. So these two notes, well, one of these two notes is scrutinizing this industrial deficit, and it's very important not only for the economy but for society. How can you give jobs to the youth of India if you don't industrialize? It's a key question. It's a really very important question. Well, one big problem, of course, is lack of investment. The investment rate kept diminishing for many years. It is again increasing a little bit, but it's very low. And you can't industrialize a country with such a low investment rate. You need at least 36, 37% of investment rate. And India fell at 26, 27. It is recovering slightly. It must be around 31 now, but it's too low. Then the question is, why don't industrialists invest in India? Why don't they put their money in the Indian industry? There is a whole series of questions there that are very complicated. Maybe the mindset of Indian capitalists, especially crony capitalists, is more rent-seeking oriented, is more trade-oriented, and is not so much industry-oriented. But also there is the fact that they put their money abroad. And that's another question that needs to be asked. Why are they fearful? One day Rahul Bajaj said that they were feeling a kind of fear across the industry, across the business milieu. That may be an interesting question to ask. But whatever the reason, investment is not there. For another very key factor, the demand is not there. There is no demand because the middle class is shrinking. And if you don't have consumers, why should you invest in the first place? And the rate of savings is now very low also. And it goes with the kind of debt households are having. So that's the macro picture. That's the larger picture. A very low investment rate resulting in, because of low demand, because of many reasons that I have listed already. Plus one thing that I want to also add, very low investment in innovation, research and development. It's something like 6% of the GDP. Only Mexico is doing as bad as India among the emerging countries, and of course the developed countries. So the money is not put in innovation. Therefore, you don't have the means to compete with some of the industrial powers in the world, including China, that is investing so much more in innovation, research and development, R&D, as we say. And this takes me to your question, because indeed the Make in India project has not made India in a position, has not put India in a position to compete with China. On the contrary, it has increased. Well, it has increased. It has gone parallel. It has developed parallel to some more dependence vis-a-vis China in key sectors, including the pharma industry, pharmaceuticals, and also electronics, because India does much better on that front than before. iPhones are built in India, are made in India, but with many components coming from China or from Chinese companies based in Vietnam or elsewhere. So you have a dependence vis-à-vis China that is so big that the more India exports, the more it imports as well, because you need to import from China to export to the world. Generics in the medicine, electronic products in the electronic sector, and this is the big challenge. Can India emancipate itself from this dependence? That is very costly. The trade deficit with China is just enormous, something like $85 billion this year. So it's not only dependence in terms of technology, in terms of products, it's also trade deficit that is very difficult to absorb for the country.
Right. So to emerge out of this situation, you talk about two scenarios. The first is a deepening dependence on China. You say that this is likely Western investors do not invest more in India, a trend that, as you were just mentioning, already has been evident in the past 2 years or so, with, as you were just saying, the FDI plummeting from about $82 billion in 2021-22 to $71 billion in 2023 to 24, and is now further projected to about $42 billion in 24-25. Now, the question is, as you were just mentioning, that India remains reliant on China to even export. In order for it to export, its imports remain important. So what does it mean really for India to become more dependent on China economically, particularly when it pursues a muscular nationalist policy at home?
Exactly. This is the big paradox. You have at the helm of the country politicians who claim that they are defending the nation more effectively than ever before. And on the one hand, they lose 2,000 square kilometers in the Himalayas, and on the other hand, they make India more dependent upon China than probably ever before economically. So this is something that is not debated. You don't speak about these issues in parliament. You don't speak about these issues so much on the public scene. But it's key, because once your industry is not free from foreign influence, when your industry, especially the part of the industry that will contribute to the defense of the country, that's, of course, weakening the sovereignty of the country. So already China is gaining momentum in most of the neighboring countries of India. But if also India itself is not independent from Chinese influence, that will certainly be an additional constraint. So that's one of the two routes, one of the two scenarios I mentioned at the end of the note. The other scenario is, well, self-reliance, because the word self-reliance is used all the time, is supposed to be an objective. But to be self-reliant, India needs to see its industrialists investing in industry, investing in research and development, number one. And it needs to give purchasing power to its people. Because why should the industrialists invest if they can't sell? But you can't sell when you have poverty increasing to such a proportion that what we used to call the neo-middle class has been completely evaporating. The neo-middle class, I don't know if you remember this formula, that was the word Narendra Modi used in 2012 in Gujarat. That was the word Arun Jaitley used. That was in 2015 when he presented his first budget. And this word has disappeared because this neo-middle class has disappeared. You have a kind of K-shaped growth pattern today. The richest become richer, the middle class and lower middle class uh, decline in number and in purchasing power. So that's the route that I mentioned, and it means that um, India should not wait for Western investors, because they have not come in large numbers. they may return to India, but we thought that they would leave China and invest in India. That was the idea, especially after Trump won. They have not in very large numbers, really. That will probably take place if tensions with China intensify. But instead of waiting for Western investments, use the local resources first, and therefore give purchasing power and give incentives to the industrialists to invest in India, and of course that goes against crony capitalism, because crony capitalism results in some oligarchic system with oligarchs exerting a kind of rent. You are almost in a monopoly in the energy, in the airports, in the ports, in so many sectors. That's not good for development. And then, of course, a lot of money goes abroad. A lot of money has to be repatriated.
A corollary of what you were just mentioning is that the second scenario kind of flows from what you were just saying right now, is that the industrial emancipation and self-reliance that even the Modi government talks about, Atmanirbhar Bharat. So in order to achieve this, India needs to break away from its dependence on China. And as you were just saying, relying on FDI from other countries, other Western countries, and even Asian countries like Japan and Taiwan, for instance, as you were saying. But you're saying that it needs to focus on stronger redistribution efforts, but you say that such a policy would be more likely under an opposition-led government, given that demand-side economic measures are central to its agenda. Would you then say that under a continued BJP government about 5 years from now, the dependence on China is likely to continue?
Well, at least the capacity to industrialize on the basis of its own strength will not increase. And by default, therefore, yes, probably it will be from China that some support will come. At least some of the, I would say, material you need to export will continue to come. And when I say that the opposition would be in a better position to redistribute, it's on the basis of what we saw in the past. When you remember what the UPA government did, it really helped poor people to somewhat acquire some purchasing power. They created consumers. Therefore, they created markets. Even in rural India, with the NRAGA, that gave some purchasing power to millions of people who had none before. Plus, the decline of indirect taxes. This is one of the problems India has today. You have so much indirect taxes and so little direct taxes, especially on the richest. You make the purchasing power of the middle class diminishing all the time, and it's a pro-rich policy. It's an explicitly pro-rich policy. Well, a pro-rich policy a la BJP cannot help the industrialists to find markets in so many domains, automobiles, of course, but also two-wheelers, three-wheelers. So yes, I really think that behind the ideology, behind the Hindu nationalist ideology, is an elitist project. And elitism is not good for redistribution. And redistribution is what you need for giving purchasing power to the largest number of people who would become consumers and who would invite industrialists to invest because there is a market, and that's what they need.
So this actually brings us to the second paper, where you talk about these contrasted regional dynamics, which kind of poses this problem that you were just talking about, that if industrialists are to come, then they need investment opportunities. But also, India has a unique challenge in that there's a north-south divide, as we know of, where southern states have adopted better population control measures. Their social spending has contributed to better economies, as well as other indicators like health health, education, in comparison to northern states that have lagged behind. Now, this has in recent months also dominated politics in India. We have seen southern states asking for their share in central funds and alleging that they have been unfair in the devolution of funds to the center, has been unfair in the devolution of funds to southern states. And tensions have also increased with the Modi-led central government in recent months, with several states, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, saying that they deserve their fair share of taxes, which essentially highlights what you write about, is that the widening gap between these two regions, as well as the policy of the government, which is perceived as you were just saying, elitist, and what you write about as pro-North and pro-Gujarat, that is perceived in the South. So just to tell our viewers, here you take the cases of Bihar, Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. These are three states in the South, North and the West. Now, before we delve into what these analyses of these three states really reveal, if you could tell us why you chose these three particular states.
Well, they are typical of the three regions, meta regions, what we call the Indie Belt. Instead of the North, I would prefer to say Indie Belt, because Punjab is in the north, but Punjab has a different trajectory, for instance. Whereas Indie Belt states, Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, they really represent a huge entity. The West, Gujarat and Maharashtra, are very similar, but Gujarat is certainly more interesting because it is now taking over Maharashtra in many different ways. And in the South, well, I could have chosen another one, but Tamil Nadu is terribly interesting because Tamil Nadu has succeeded in getting both industry and services, which is quite exceptional. So yes, the idea was to, in fact, document the point you've just raised. What is this divide? How many Indias in India? And how far can the divergence be manageable? The divergence is dramatic. Whatever the indicator you look at, the Indie Belt and the South are diverging. You look at education, you look at life expectancy, you look at per capita revenue, diverging. That's why this note is also based on some anticipation. What will India be in 2050 if we continue to diverge the way we diverge today? And of course, Gujarat had to be there because it's supposed to be a model. It's supposed to be the state that has succeeded in each and every respect for at least 10 years. So it was interesting to compare these states in terms of literacy, education, in terms of per capita revenue, in terms of industrialization, in terms of so many indicators, the usual indicators, malnutrition, everything. To show what? To show that Bihar is lagging behind in each and every respect, unsurprisingly. More rural, so much more poor, simply, less infrastructure. And when you compare Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, then you have a shock. You have a shock because you realize that Gujarat is very similar to Tamil Nadu in terms of infrastructure, in terms of industry. It's doing better in terms of electricity production, in terms of roads. Roads have probably been what Narendra Modi invested in the most when he was chief minister. But Gujarat is closer to Bihar than Tamil Nadu in many respects, including malnutrition, including the poverty gap, when the rate of people living below the poverty line. Education is not great at all. At least English medium education is very poor. So it's interesting to see that if there is a model in India today, it's Tamil Nadu. Here is a state where you have almost eradicated poverty, where you have industrialized at a very, very high pace, and where services are taking over from industry. Something you don't see in Gujarat. Where is the IT sector in Gujarat? It's just not there. And one of the reasons is lack of education, lack of English medium education. You promote Gujarati at the expense of English. You pay the price for that because you don't have the engineers who need to know English for becoming um, particularly effective in the IT sector. So yes, it was a very, I found, interesting comparison that showed three Indias going in three different directions. And again, if you anticipate and if you try to see what will be the situation in 2050, then you can see even more contrast. One big question in 2050 will be the rise of the population in the north. The rise of the population in the north is
right. We'll just come to that in just a moment. Before we move to what you anticipate for 2050, I also want to discuss a little bit about how these three models, how you have analyzed these three models given their governance policies over the years. And we've seen that in Tamil Nadu, there's been a priority over social welfare along with other states in the south, while the Gujarat's model, which is widely seen as the Modi model, given that he was chief minister for so many years before he became prime minister, and as you were just mentioning, remains skewed towards infrastructure development. And Bihar, interestingly, as you note, has a higher expenditure on social spending, which underscores its unique position among these Hindi-speaking states in that it has prioritized social investments despite its fiscal constraints, but it remains backward. Now, you write that in the next 2 decades or so till 2050, which is about 3 odd years after India seeks to be Viksit Bharat, Bihar is unlikely to see its social and economic indicators improve despite its prioritizing social investments. And you say that this has significant implications on national as well as international level. Why do you say so?
Well, India will be 1.7 billion large in terms of population by 2050, a little bit less. It will peak in 2065, 67, and then it will be 1.7 billion large. Nobody can ignore that. That's why I say it's an international issue. It's not only a national issue. Already, migrants, illegal migrants, are in the news. When the population will have increased so much, where will people go if they have no job in the country? So it has to be seen in a global picture. You can't look at this with national silos. And of course, for the nation, for India, to develop the Indie Belt should be the key priority. The whole country will have a very difficult time if the level of poverty remains what it is in the Indie Belt. Especially if the redelimitation plan is implemented. Because if by 2026, 2027, the constituencies of the Lok Sabha are redelimited according to the demographic scenarios, then the North, the Indie Belt, will be over-dominating, will be hegemonic at the expense of the South. And already the South is very resentful of the kind of money it sends to the North. It is as simple as that. The South doesn't want to pay for the North anymore. Already in 2025. Can you imagine in 25 years from now what it will be? And if the number of MPs is multiplied by X, making the North even more hegemonic, tensions will become really acrimonious. You will have a real issue, a real challenge for federalism, especially if there is this tendency towards centralization. So that's why I thought it was important to anticipate what would be the situation in 20 years from now, because this is something we never do. We never think about the coming decades if the scenarios already in place continue. And that should be done to decide the policies, because the policies in terms of education in the first place, in terms of security, I mean, the kind of crops that should be cultivated for giving food to all these people at the expense of cotton, at the expense of sugarcane, at the expense of even rice, because there is not enough water for all that. Everything goes in the same, I would say, breathe. You have when you start anticipating thinking about the future, all the policies you have to put in place crystallize. And that's what statesmen are supposed to do, prepare the future.
And the important part of this, of course, is the fact that India has not had conducted a population census in over a decade now. We don't know how many people. You're, of course, saying that India's population is going to remain a problem in the coming decades. But even now, what is the population at hand? How many people are actually poor and deserving of welfare benefits? And how many people are being left out of the food security net along with other welfare benefits? We do not know. And knowing how many people there are is also very key to policy making. But essential to this is what you also talk about is the unequal development that has been taking place. And I thought it was interesting that you're saying that Gujarat is a typical case of unequal development, where spending has focused on industrialization, particularly with power plants, refineries, and income inequality has only widened. Would you say that this is representative of India in the last decade, given that it is the Gujarat model that was promised to India in 2014? And what does it look like for the future?
No, certainly. My book, Gujarat as a Laboratory of India, of course, deal with politics, Hindu nationalism. The way it was implemented in Gujarat is now implemented in India, but it works also for the economy. And I would say also the society. It's a model in the sense that you have no inhibition so far as inequalities are concerned. Inequalities are not bad in themselves. You should not target inequalities as an objective. If inequalities increase because of your economic system of development, let it be. It's a phase. And on the economic front, yes, big companies, big projects have to be promoted. That was exactly what Narendra Modi did in 2005, 2007, when he was elected for the second time. Mega projects are given a priority. As you said, refineries, but also huge SEZ like Mundra for Gautam Adani. All these projects were very intensive in capital and not labor intensive at all. So you have growth, a lot of growth, but you don't create jobs. It's a jobless growth. You become rich because these refineries, these energy projects, they are really juicy, very juicy enterprises. And they are in the hands of few men. If you look at the number of cronies who were there under Modi in Gujarat, half a dozen men could really support the vibrant Gujarat events and make Narendra Modi powerful. So it's not good in terms of social development because of joblessness. And that's why so many Gujaratis have to leave Gujarat. And that's why you see that more than 40% of the illegal migrants in the US today are Gujaratis. It's not good for job creation. It's not good for any fight against inequalities. It's good for a handful of rich men who become cronies and who become rent seekers and who become, of course, national figures. What we see today, the Gujarat model has been transposed to India because the same men continue to control the economy, which is something few people anticipated, because So many people thought in 2014, oh, India is too big. India has robust institutions. They will never capture power the way they have captured power in Gujarat. Of course they have. Of course they can. And on the result also, on the basis also of a surveillance state that was experienced first in Gujarat. That's where it started. So, yeah, to respond to your question, I do think that the political economy that we saw emerging under Narendra Modi in Gujarat has now become the order of the day. And it's not good for fight against poverty. It's not good for federalism because you need to let SMEs prosper, and in each state there is a need for a larger number of SMEs. They have killed the SMEs in Gujarat to a large extent.
So this is the kind of flows into what you're saying is the alternative model that has developed in the form of Tamil Nadu, where it has focused on these SMEs, the small and medium sector enterprises. And you say that this model is likely to be supported by the opposition, which focuses more on human resources oriented development strategy. And you say that this model may gather more supporters because of what we were just talking about earlier, which is increasing unemployment and impoverishment of the lower middle class. But do you see such a model taking shape in the BJP years? Because we have seen some measures being announced in the Union Budget 2025 recently about empowering the middle class more with tax cuts, and elections have become more about welfareism through what is referred to as freebies. Now, in the coming years, would you say that the BJP, if it remains in power, it would have to move towards such a model? And do you see that happening?
Well, it's too early to say whether they will really do what they promise. Um, I would say that the opposition is in a better position for promoting a more decentralized modus operandi, simply because it's a collection of state parties. It's a collection of state parties. It's exactly what we saw during the UPA government under Manmohan Singh. You have 15 parties forming the coalition, the ruling coalition, and therefore you need to give them their due at the state level. And at the state level, most of the ruling parties rely on more, I would say, balanced forces of power. SMEs have to be taken care of. You need to give jobs to people. You need to decentralize the economic power as well. Dissemination of power is more likely to be the order of the day with a coalition government. This is the irony. People think you need a strong man, you need a strong government, you need a dominant party. No, not in India. What you need is dissemination of people, consensus building, and distribution of resources in order to make SMEs flourishing, giving jobs to people, because it's more labor intensive. By definition, SMEs are more labor intensive than the big conglomerates, especially when they do energy and means of transportation. So yes, I think, again, beyond ideology, that's what is so interesting. You have a political economy that goes almost automatically with it. So we need to look at BJP not only as a Hindu nationalist party, but as an elitist party, by definition almost, because it was anti-Mandal, and also a party that is prone to crony capitalism. And at the moment when job creation should be a priority, that's counterproductive.
And finally, I want to ask you that you write that Bihar's case remains important as India wants to emerge as a global power. Now, that really kind of encapsulates India's problem in a nutshell, because Bihar represents the Hindi-speaking North India in your analysis, which has greater demographic weight and that's only likely to increase in the coming years. And you're saying that this demographic weight could possibly pull India down. You say that tensions could also increase in the event of a delimitation exercise, as you were just talking about. And we saw that few months back when delimitation and census exercises were likely to be conducted, southern states were already up in arms, and at least two chief ministers even asked people to have more children, saying that why should we suffer because of our successful population control policies. So what is the way around this in your opinion, and what can be done to bring the country on one page and make all states equally attractive for industries and foreign capital as India seeks to be a global power?
You see, the main variable for making family planning effective is education. So if there is one thing that India should do at the moment is to invest in education and health. And, it's very interesting. Education and health have been the two, I would say, kinds of expenses that the southern countries have developed the most. By contrast, it's not at all a priority when you look at the two other states. At least Gujarat has not invested in education and health the same way. And you pay the price, of course, in terms of employability of your working force, but also in terms of demographic growth. Because it's with education that you focus more on family planning, and also with you become bourgeois. The bourgeois doesn't want to have too many children. So middle class people who want to get their kids educated, that's costly. They'll get only two maximum, one or two even. But for that you need education. And I'm really terrified by the decline of education in so many parts of the country. Higher education for sure, because it is under control, but you need to give more to the primary education, and that's why the midday meal should be something you should have in a very systematic manner. And we are back to Tamil Nadu, because Tamil Nadu invented it. Midday meal, so many other initiatives that could be developed for bringing the kids in the school, for educating the people.
So you're saying health and education need to be improved in order for India to first even look at becoming a global power. So we'll be keeping our eyes on all these developments. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us and giving us your valuable insights into how India's developing right now and the different Indias within India. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.